in a bold and historic act. Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré has launched direct action against former U.S. President Barack Obama after explosive revelations surfaced that USAID may have been a covert front funneling support to terror cells across Africa. This expose uncovers the hidden ties Traoré's immediate and forceful retaliation, the global storm now shaking the pillars of international diplomacy. What proof lies behind these claims? Who is implicated? What unfolds next may alter the geopolitical order. It began quietly on a Monday. In Ouagadougou, President Traoré had just wrapped up a routine security meeting when a sealed black envelope was handed to him. No stamp, no sender. Just 3 blood-red words: USAID, Africa, blood. Inside, he found classified files, satellite footage, intercepted communications. No. In transaction trails linking USAID-funded programs to armed groups attacking African villages. Even more damning, digital traces tied these schemes to former U.S. officials, including members of Barack Obama's foundation. Traoré's pulse quickened. Entire communities had been erased over recent years. Survivors spoke of men arriving in white trucks, giving aid, then vanishing before militias appeared. Now the rumors had confirmation. He stood up. The room froze. Calm but cold, he ordered, "Bring in the intelligence chief. We act now before they erase the trail." That night, the palace lights went dark. No press, no briefings, but a quiet revolution had begun. By sunrise, Operation Chingua had been launched a secret 72-hour blitz to reveal just how deep foreign agents had burrowed, all under the guise of humanitarian work. Traoré excluded all foreign advisors. Only a tight unit of trusted intelligence officers and 3 brilliant young analysts, sons of farmers, seekers of truth, were enlisted. They split into covert cells. One team swept through deserted USAID offices. Another breached NGO warehouses. The third cracked dormant satellite hubs just outside the capital. What they uncovered was sickening blanket shipments never recorded, expired vaccines dumped in the poorest villages, and internal memos from foreign contractors joking about softening resistance zones. But one note froze the room, handwritten in thick ink. It read, Phase 3, displace, starve, arm. Faintly scribbled on the back, approved, BO. The team stared in stunned silence. Could Barack Obama have truly known, nor was his name hijacked? Traoré didn't leap to accuse. "We investigate first, then we speak." But his eyes burned not from fury, but from heartbreak. For years, Africa had trusted those who smiled while hiding sharpened teeth. In eastern Burkina Faso, the village of Kawabu had once known peace. Now it was dust. President Traoré arrived without press or ceremony, only quiet resolve. Burned huts, collapsed wells, shredded children's clothing scattered in ash. They found Fatuma, the last elder left. Her voice trembled. They came giving rice, taking names. They smiled. And days later, the men with guns came. They torched everything. Took our sons. She wept. "My grandson, my only grandson, he is gone." The team showed her images recovered from the files. She pointed the USAID logo. A face in sunglasses. "He was there, said America loved us." That man, later confirmed, was a senior U.S. contractor tied to counterinsurgency ops. Traoré knelt beside her in silence. In one hand he held her hand, in the other the photo of her grandson. A tear slipped down his cheek. Not just for her, but for every African child stolen by deception disguised as charity. The hourglass had turned. Truth was now racing forward. Near Kaya, in a small rural clinic, a barefoot boy named Asaf stumbled in, pale and trembling. Could barely speak. A nurse gave him water. As he drank, he pulled a tiny, folded, muddy paper from his torn shorts. It was soaked, crumpled, but inside were GPS coordinates and a message scrawled in childish handwriting. They took us. They dig holes. We cry. They say it's for America, covered in dirt. But inside were coordinates in a chilling message scrawled in the shaky handwriting of a child. They took us here. We dig holes. We cry. They say we're helping America. The nurse froze. She immediately contacted the presidential tip line created under Operation Chingyela. Within hours, President Traoré's elite unit descended by helicopter. Sef pointed toward the hills near Palma Forest. They followed. What they discovered shattered the soul of a continent. A shallow grave, then another, then another. Tiny bones, torn clothes, rusted shovels. President Traoré stood wordless, watching his men cover the graves with the Burkina flag. He whispered, "They were just children." And as the wind whipped through the trees, it echoed like the wails of the earth whales that demanded justice, the kind that roused sleeping lions. Back in Ouagadougou, while ISAF received care, the intel team began analyzing the GPS data and decrypting files seized from USAID servers. Then came the crack in the wall. One of the analysts, Mariam, decrypted a short accidental voice memo captured by a foreign contractor's satellite phone. Just 30 seconds. But it made Traoré stop breathing. Ensure Phase 4 begins in Burkina Faso by next week. Keep the region unstable, and the funding stream remains untouched. Obama's cover through. The foundation still holds. Silence fell across the war room. The voice matched a flagged CIA operative, one tied to development programs across Mali, Niger, and Chad. Traoré's fist tightened. This wasn't just infiltration, it was war by manipulation. Children were being weaponized. He turned to Mariam, translate this. Send it to the African Union, then leak it. The world must hear. That moment was ignition.
Ow.
The veil of aid was burning. President Traoré was no longer playing defense. He was roaring. That very night, a red-stamped intelligence file hit his desk, tracing millions funneled by USAID through a Caribbean shell company. ... Registered in the Caribbean. From there, the money was funneled into a non-profit branch of the Obama Foundation labeled Global Youth Development. But the youth they were developing held AK-47s. Satellite imagery showed compounds in northern Benin and eastern Burkina Faso, once described as climate education centers. They were now clearly weapons depots. One image showed a boy, just 14, from Kabu, Fatuma's grandson, alive but no longer the same. Used. When President Traoré saw the picture, he sat down slowly, his eyes wet and distant. They turned our future into soldiers, using our trust, our suffering. His generals asked, "What now?" Gave one command. "We will speak loud, without fear." The next morning he stood before cameras. The world watched. Didn't speculate, he presented. Documents, bank trails, names, photos. And then he said the line that would shake every capital on earth. "If aid means killing our children, then let the aid stop today." Silence. Africa had found its lion. In a quiet village near Fotengorma, a woman named Owa sat barefoot. On the dirt outside her home, her eldest son Hamidou had left a year ago. Lured by promises of education and food through a foreign youth program, she never saw him again. All she had left was the last letter he wrote. "Mama," they say. "I'll be a hero, but I'm scared. We carry guns. We shout words I don't understand." When she saw President Traoré on TV exposing the lie, something broke inside. She walked for 6 hours to the nearest military base. There she showed the letter. Soldiers bowed their heads. One whispered she is not alone. Within minutes, her story was entered into a database. Dozens of other mothers. Same promise, same silence, same grief. That night, Traoré read her letter aloud, his voice cracking. "This is not just scandal. This is a wound in Africa's soul," he vowed. "We will bring every son home or die trying." Meanwhile, in a shadowed back room in Niamey, Niger, men gathered some African. Some foreign ... papers passed quietly, and a map was unfurled across the table, marked with red X's, over Burkina Faso, Mali, and Chad. A man, voice smooth with an American accent, leaned in and said, Destabilization breeds dependence. That's how we keep the contracts alive. It's an older, balding figure added, and Traore, he's becoming a problem. What they didn't know was that the quiet young waiter serving tea was no waiter at Albert Burkina, intelligence officer. He recorded every word. By morning, the footage reached President Traore's desk. His jaw tightened. It confirmed. Everything, foreign orchestrated destabilization. Bribed African officials, encoded payments, traced directly to the Obama-linked Global Youth Fund. Worst of all, our directive. Neutralize Traore. Quietly. But Traore didn't flinch. He looked his generals in the eye and said, "Let them come. We will not hide. We are not the hunted. We are the hunters now." And for the first time in decades, Africa had a leader who refused to bow. The truth wasn't trickling, it was erupting. In a dusty school near Diaga, children had stopped showing up. Whispers spread. The air smelled foul, and the basement lights flickered deep into the night. Acting on a tip from his underground network, Traore dispatched a silent team. What they uncovered defied belief. Beneath a locked cellar door was a makeshift prison, bare floors, iron chains, and stained bedding. 12 children, weak and terrified, held like cargo. Trafficked through fake aid channels and stored underground like forgotten property. On the walls, names carved by trembling fingers begging not to disappear. When Traore arrived, villagers gathered. Mothers collapsed in screams as their children, emaciated, ghostly, were brought out. But they were alive. Duh. The president dropped. To his knees, no media, no politics, just a father in pain, his tears falling onto red earth. Forgive us for not seeing this sooner. The world hadn't seen the footage yet, but it was coming. And when it came, it would crush the hearts of ... millions. The rescued children were taken to safety. The school was sealed forever, but the deeper truth remained. Aid without love is simply war in disguise. As news of the underground child prison and the USAID money trail spread like wildfire through African media, people looked to the United Nations for a response. But the UN remained silent. Days passed. No press statements. No emergency session. It's just quiet Bakshano calls to President Traore, urging him to remain calm and protect diplomatic ties. But Traore wouldn't bend. He stood before his people, holding up a small, blood-stained school uniform from one of the children. "This isn't diplomacy," he declared. "This is evil hiding behind a flag." In New York, UN officials met behind closed doors. One African delegate, after viewing the footage from Traore's office, broke down in tears. "They sold our children. For politics," he whispered. Back in Ouagadougou, citizens poured into the streets. Thousands. Elderly women held signs. "Our children are not experiments." Men beat drums, others cried. And in the center, Traore walked among them, not with guards, but with a megaphone and fire in his voice. "We will not be silent for the sake of peace, if that peace is soaked in the blood of our people." The world watched. Still, the West said nothing. Until one man shattered the silence, and everything changed. A former USAID contractor, Jacob Freeman, once hailed as a humanitarian by Washington, had vanished years ago. But now he resurfaced with proof. He leaked thousands of internal emails, confidential contracts, bank records, satellite pings. One email, dated 2018, read, "Ensure logistics reach GTC Unit 9 via proxy NGOs in the Sahel. Keep optics clean." Labeled terror-linked camps as youth training. Another document listed Obama's former foundation as the development liaison for USAID operations in Burkina Faso. The files went viral across Africa. Hashtag Justice for Burkina exploded online. French and US media called Traore for comment, but he had already made his move. Every foreign NGO tied to the program was ... investigated. Some Western leaders called the decision reckless. But Traore stood firm. "What's dangerous," he said, "is pretending to feed people while training children to shoot their own brothers." The truth could no longer be buried, not under aid, not behind diplomatic smiles. And for the first time in decades, the people felt something powerful: pride. On the 5th day of the firestorm, an urgent cable arrived from the U.S. Embassy in Accra, Ghana, addressed to Ouagadougou. President Obama wished to speak directly with President Traore. The room froze. Advisors looked at one another, unsure. But Traore didn't blink. "He had years to speak while our children were dying," he said. "Now he will listen." Instead of a private call, Traore sent a public message. "If your hands are clean, come to Burkina Faso. Sit with the mothers. Drink their tears. Look them in the eyes." The message caught fire. In Washington, some labeled it an insult. But across Africa, millions reposted the video with one message: "Finally, someone speaks for us." In a small village in Togo, a grandmother whispered, "Ibrahim is not just a president. He is our voice." Across Senegal, the Congo, and Kenya, young people painted murals of Traore, cradling a child in one arm, lifting a flag in the other. The world was waking up to what he truly stood for: truth, honor, and an Africa that refused to kneel. But the pressure was building because one more spark could light a storm no one could stop. On the 7th day, Africa woke heavy. In cities, across the continent, streets filled with protesters. In Nairobi, students in black held candles and marched. In Mali, a boy stood on a box and shouted, "We are not your puppets." Yet the shock came not from Africa, but America. In Chicago, protesters gathered outside the Obama Foundation headquarters. Most were African immigrants. Some wept. Woman held a photo of her brother, killed in Niger by militants. "You gave them guns and called it aid," she cried. CNN ran the story. Then MSNBC, then Fox News, news outlets buzzed. And suddenly Barack Obama, once hailed as a symbol of global hope, was facing questions he had never been forced to answer. Did your administration knowingly allow USAID to fund violent groups in Africa? Reporters asked. The former president said nothing. His office issued a brief, clinical statement. "We categorically deny these allegations and remain committed to global peace." But the world wasn't buying it anymore. There were too many bodies, too many secrets buried in red soil. And in Ouagadougou, President Traore was preparing something that would turn a burning scandal into a global inferno: a live public trial. The national stadium, once echoing with music and football chants, became a court of the people. Thousands packed the stands. Millions watched online. It was called the People's Tribunal. Traore stood at the center not as a ruler, but as a servant. He invited survivors to speak. A girl, no older than 17, took the mic. "I was kidnapped. When I was 13, she said, they told us they were helping. The food was from Americans. Then they handed us guns." She broke into sobs. The crowd wept. Then an old man stepped forward. His village was gone, his words few, his grief enormous. When he finished, Traore walked to the center and lifted 2 flags. One, the proud red-green-gold of Burkina Faso, the other an American flag. Torn and stained with blood, recovered from a raided terror camp. "We are not against a nation," he said. "We are against lies disguised as kindness." Viewers around the globe trembled. No African leader had ever done this. Not like this. Not this raw. Then the unthinkable happened. Top U.S. diplomat defected. He boarded a private flight bound for Ouagadougou. His name was Ambassador Alan Ree. He had served under 3 U.S. presidents across 6 African nations, but nothing had prepared him for this. When he landed, pale and trembling, Traore welcomed him in private. For 1 hour, they spoke. Then, Alan stepped into the stadium. He faced the cameras, his voice shaking. "I've served my country for 30 years. But what I witnessed, what I signed, it haunts me every single night," he whispered, pulling out a thick folder. Inside were copies of top-secret agreements between USAID, American security firms, and fake NGOs. They said it was peace-building, Alan said, but it was chaos. Always chaos. He broke down in tears. The stadium fell into deep silence. Then, a boy, barefoot, dusty, no older than 10, walked up to the stage in a ripped shirt and hugged the diplomat. The crowd broke into sobs. Traore stood still, eyes lifted to the heavens, as if whispering to the dead. "This is not just about Burkina Faso," he said. "This is about every African soul used, deceived, discarded." What came next would ignite shockwaves through U.S. Congress. At precisely 3:47 a.m., classified envelope marked "Eyes Only" arrived at the presidential palace. It was from an American soldier still stationed in Africa. Inside, dozens of photos, video stills, GPS data, and signed military manifests. One image showed a terror camp in northern Burkina Faso dated just 3 months prior. Standing beside rebels were 2 USAID officials, laughing. Another showed a warehouse filled with rifles crates labeled humanitarian aid, shipped from a U.S. military base in Djibouti. Traoré's hands trembled. He summoned his cabinet. Press conference now. By sunrise, his face was broadcast across every African network. "This isn't a war of bullets," he said. "This is a war of betrayal." He held up the letter and stared into the lens. "You used our pain. Now we will use our voice." A wave of silence swept the continent. In that sacred pause, Traore read one line aloud from the soldier's note. "I am sorry. I didn't sign up to murder Africa." That evening, something extraordinary happened. In a dusty refugee camp near Kaya, an 8-year-old boy named Adama climbed onto a rock, barefoot, alone. He raised his hands and shouted, "President Traore, we love you." He had no shoes, no parents, but what he had was hope. A nearby journalist caught it all on video. It exploded online. Dar es Salaam, Lusaka, and Kano. People began writing 3 simple words on walls, on shirts, even in the sand. G. Suis Traore. I am Traore. Not just for the man, but for what he represented, the courage to rise. At the United Nations, diplomats dodged cameras. The U.S. ambassador was recalled, and Obama, still silent. But now, silence sounded like guilt. That evening, President Traore returned to the stadium. His speech was brief. His boy Adama lost everything, yet he still believes. That is Africa. That is power. Then he turned to Adama, who stood beside him, shaking. Traore knelt down, untied his own shoes, and gently fixed the boy's broken sandals. The crowd cried. So did millions watching across the globe. Even in America, something shifted. "Maybe Traore is the leader we all need," people whispered. One week, one truth. One storm that cracked the silence of the world. Then came his final press briefing, no stage, no armored walls, just Traore and his people. He presented it all: documents, audio logs, payment routes, and links between Obama's team and the USAID arms chain. But he didn't scream for vengeance. He whispered of rebirth. If we meet hate with hate, we become them. But if we teach, build, and rise, we end their game. Then he raised his hand. Africa will no longer kneel, we rise. That same day, 10 African countries halted all USAID activity. Obama's legacy cracked, but Africa's spirit soared. Babies were named Ibrahim. A new anthem played in Ouagadougou, in Adama. He was adopted by a village school funded by ordinary people. Across the planet, because one man's truth had moved mountains. That evening, the sky turned the color of fire, and the people smiled not out of safety, but out of strength. Now it's your turn, dear viewer. If this story made you cry, if you felt the heartbeat of Africa and the roar of Traore, Dante, just scroll, like this video, help it reach the world. Comment, Africa will rise. Subscribe, because more truths are coming. And remember, one voice can change everything. Let it be yours.